Are we set? All right, we turned it on. Terrific. All right, so Anne is here this evening for, I don't even remember how many years we've been doing this together. Probably 20, 25 maybe anyway. No, it's really...
We started very small.
Yes, we were both very young. Well, we barely away from our mothers when we began all this. Actually, we began this at the first Poison Pen, that little 600 square feet bookstore. It was across from Ollie's on Main Street. And at one point, I remember we had a tent in the parking lot. It was you and Edward Marston.
Oh, yeah, I remember.
Do you remember that?
Yes.
Yes. And
Is he still around?
Not here, but yes, he's still
Around
kicking.
somewhere.
Yeah, he's still kicking over there in England. And we had a customer who volunteered to put up electricity outside, you know, so we could have spotlights and other stuff. And then we keep moving. We realized that we have been in this store now, we will be 20 years next year. And it feels like we were all shocked because we thought we just moved here, didn't we, Pat? Patrick particularly got kind of white when I said that. It's like, whoa!
It's frightening, isn't it?
It is.
It's, when did such and such happen? Well, it was just way back a little bit, a couple of years ago. It was 5 years ago. What? I've been here 4 years already.
Yes, since you moved. Anne has relocated to the United States now on a permanent basis, so we get to see her more often than when she was in Scotland, when it was a slightly farther commute. So we're really delighted about that. But I brought that up because we have been here for the introduction of William Monk and various other projects that Anne has done. And tonight we're going to talk about a new character. His name is Daniel. You hinted at it when you were here before, but now you can really talk about it.
Oh, yeah, I've done the second one now.
Well, we don't know that.
You do.
I know.
Well, you have to. They gave me 2 months to do it. I said, it's not possible. I've got to have 3. But I enjoy him. He's Pitt's son, and he's now 25, and he's a young lawyer. And because the century has turned, a man being very much a counting animal, I don't know if you know history, but looking at world history, we always seem to come to a climax in various things towards the end of a century, start fresh with the new century. I don't know whether it just runs in cycles that long, or whether it's because we know we're coming to the end of the century. But Queen Victoria died in 1901, and we're with her son as king, but Daniel, of course, has nothing to do with him. And we're 4 years before the war, 1910. But the reason I chose it's got nothing to do with the war, because I'm hoping to get lots of stories in before then. If we can go that far, it's the beginning of the serious use of forensic science in trials, which is what is making it very interesting, because Daniel is a young lawyer. And he's been a little bit of a maverick, because he takes on cases that his boss in chambers would rather he didn't. And British laws, you can represent either the prosecution or the defense, depending upon who employs you. So you're not either a defense lawyer or an attorney.
No, you're just a barrister
You're just
for
a
hire,
barrister.
so to speak.
Yes.
Right, and even the Crown can hire you. You can be prosecuting for, at that point, the king. Or you could be, any of you watch Rumpole? You know, Rumpole was always for the defense, right? But other people in his chambers were prosecuting, and there was no conflict in having 2 lawyers in the same group, you know, representing different sides of the case.
No, I thought I knew that as a fact, and I realized I'd know it watching Rumpole. And somebody said to me, you can't do that. I thought I could. Then I have to think, where do I get that idea from? Where I get most of it, we all get most of our things from the television. But John, whatever his name was, would have known, writing Rumpole.
Oh, John Mortimer.
Yes.
Yes, because he actually was a barrister, or maybe he still is a barrister. I'm not sure whether he's still with us.
I don't think so, but I'm not sure. Better not say he...
Anyway, a distinguished barrister in his own right.
Yes, and so that's correct. I can let Daniel can prosecute or defend, which gives him a lot of scope. And his friends can either prosecute or defend.
Right. And just to carry this one step further, there used to be, although I think it's blurring slightly, 2 different kinds of lawyers in English law. You had solicitors who basically did civil work. They were the guys that did real estate transactions and bankruptcies and corporate files and all that kind of stuff.
Divorces and things.
Yes, so civil law. And barristers, essentially, most
Barristers
of the time.
appear before the bar.
Right, but they mostly do criminal law.
Well, the barrister is the one who appears in court, and the solicitor is the one that you go to his offices and employ a barrister.
Right, so I guess I'm wrong, because barristers could actually argue civil cases for damages and so forth as long as they were in court, right?
I don't know. I think so.
Right.
But the solicitor is the one. It always amuses me when I see notices on doorways here in America that there are no solicitors.
Who wants a lawyer in the house?
Either kind.
But I mean, it's people who are soliciting, which is fair enough. Yes, but we do have two kinds of lawyers.
Right.
Solicitors who is the one you go to if you've got a legal problem, and if you are arrested and are going to come up for trial, your solicitor will find a barrister.
True. And then among barristers, there are at least two classes, one of whom are QC or Queen's Counsel, and the slang for that is they take silk, meaning their barrister robes are silk as opposed to whatever less qualified barristers get to wear, maybe, I don't know, ordinary cloth or something. There's a lot of symbolism and status symbolism in England.
It's a
Yes.
KC if there's a king on the
Or
throne.
King
QC.
Counsel.
What
Yeah.
does a magistrate do?
A magistrate's like a judge. A magistrate is not a
Junior judge.
Yeah. And they very often try civil cases. For example, magistrate's court is like traffic court and that kind of thing. But I'm not sure whether they are required to be lawyers in order to become magistrates or not.
Not necessarily, especially
I
in
don't
coroner's
think so.
court.
I think you could be a
No.
magistrate. Like you could be a JP. Can't you be
Yes.
a JP in this
Yes.
country without
Yes.
actually having a legal background?
Yes,
I
and the
think you
coroner's
can.
court is not necessarily medical, but the
Right.
medical specialists will give evidence. But the person presiding in the coroner's court doesn't have to have legal or medical
No.
qualifications.
No, and in this country, we do this nutty thing, which is we elect judges, which hardly ever has made any sense to me at all. Not everywhere, but
We appoint them, which can have some disasters, but at least they're not answerable to the public, which I think is a good thing,
yes.
because public opinion can very easily be wrong.
Or if you're running for office, we already know how dangerous that is to
Yes,
integrity
Oh,
and
the
other
black
things.
pit opening in front of my feet.
It was, we're not going there. But anyway, I brought all that up so you'd know that Daniel is a barrister, and he's a junior barrister. He is not a Casey, and he does not have silk. And so
It's a
he's
long way from that. Most
a
lawyers
long
don't.
way from that, right. And so he's very much enthralled to the seniors in his
Yes.
chamber, the head of chambers, who may assign him work to do, which is what happens to him.
I think to be a KC, you have to be invited. I don't think you can just decide you'll be.
No, I think you're right. There's a lot of
Yeah.
qualifying things that go into it, including who you know. But anyway, here's young Daniel, and he is in awe of his head of chambers, who is, we're trying to remember, is the head of chambers a colleague of his father?
Not a colleague, but a friend.
But a friend, right?
Yes, he is not. Pitt never studied law except as it applies to himself.
Right.
And Marcus Ford Croft was never in the police.
Is that Ford with a double F?
Of course.
I
Just
love
four
that.
Fs.
So is it actually pronounced Ford, or is there some complex English pronunciation that we
just
don't know?
Ford. There are
It's
a
like
few-
Chumley. I mean, who would ever figure out Chumley?
or Marshbanks, or
Yes.
which is spelled Marjorie Banks.
Yeah, or Bewley, or
Yes. a lot
what's
of
the
them.
one? I never have learned how to pronounce Featherstone Hall, but it's got some short version. Feathershaugh. I have never figured out the pronunciation.
I don't know.
It's
but-
probably Fanshawe or something such.
Yes, it's probably something quite different. And Wyndham is spelled Wymondham.
Yes. Right. The British like to give you these huge things and then contract them, as opposed to the German, who like to actually expand them into multiple syllable things. No, seriously,
One
it's,
word.
yeah, I find it really
The
intriguing.
Welsh make it all one word too.
Yes, but the Welsh, don't the Welsh have the single longest word, extant?
I think, yes.
I think so. I mean, it just goes on for like 2 sentences, and no one alive can actually pronounce it. And double L's in Welsh are pronounced, said the ladies of Llangollen. Yes, very hard.
It's a Scots
You have to be you have to really be born to it to speak Welsh.
I think you do, but doesn't it sound lovely?
Yes, and impenetrable. It'd be like the
I
Navajo
understand
Code. You know, if they had just written like their messages in the war
Yes.
in Welsh, you know, the Germans would have been completely baffled.
Well, the Germans might be able to get it because they stick all their words together in one sentence too.
Yeah, but if they'd done it in the Celtic alphabet, it would have been even harder. Well, we digress. Anyway, we often do. So here's young Daniel, and he's a young solicitor, and he is basically stuck with a case from his head of chambers that he is reluctant to pursue.
Well, 21 days. We don't put people on death row for 21 years. If we're going to do it, we do it rapidly. You're sentenced to death, and you are taken to a place. It's not named, but back to jail. And 3 Sundays from now, you'll be hanged by the neck until you're dead. And it, depending upon when now is, that's approximately 3 weeks.
Right. It has to encompass 3 Sundays, correct?
Yes.
So if you're lucky, you got sentenced on a Monday, and that
Yes.
would give you,
Yeah.
as opposed to like a Saturday, would be better.
Yes, but Daniel is given the case, and it's not his fault that he loses it. He was only assisting anyway. But it looks as if the man is guilty, but they have 21 days to find a cause for appeal and win an appeal. Not win the case, but be granted a right to appeal.
Right.
And so they're fighting against the clock.
Well, he sort of dazzles you in his first case, but that's only the opening shot in the book, and then he gets
Yes.
a more difficult
Yes, this
assignment.
case. But you will continue to know, what's his name? My mind is the man he saves in the first case.
Right.
You
His
need to
name I can't remember either.
Oh, I'm just being-
Blackwell.
Yes, thank you so much. Somebody knows. You will come again. And
I read the first 2 pages. So.
Yes.
Thank you.
Blackwell, you will continue to.
At least you didn't look it up on your phone, which is what most people do. Right.
Blackwell, you will continue to know. Roman Blackwell and his mother.
Right.
Yes.
Roman Blackwell and his mother, who's actually sort of a promising substitute for Aunt Vespasian, who you
Yes.
might surmise by 1910 is
It's
gone.
the wrong side of the tracks, really, which is.
Well, she was 85 like 40 years ago, so
Yes,
there's
I know.
no way she was going to
No,
last till
no.
1910. But I miss her.
I miss her too, and so do the characters. But Mercy Blackwell is going to be
You
gone.
can't hear. You can't hear her. Oh, okay. Is your microphone working?
Yes, thing, isn't it?
Down. You just have to hold it up. Right.
Speak into it.
Yeah. Hold it flat, yeah, that.
Right.
Is that better?
Yeah. Yeah. It's harder with your accent too. You know, we had to turn it.
I haven't got an accent. I'm speaking English.
When we watch British television, I make Rob now turn on the subtitles because it's just too challenging anymore. So think of yourself as a microphone with subtitles, and you'll do better.
Right.
Right. So, I mean, it's important, speaking of all this, it was always in the cards that Thomas Pitt, once he became so senior, at some point was not really going to be able to go out on the street and do the kind of investigations that we
Not
do.
realistically.
No. And so he's there desk-bound and so forth, but he's very much a part of what's going on because it appears that, maybe his honor is being impugned, as we might say if we were British. And also Aunt Vespasian, there's some question about whether she and her husband also deceased by now. And so there's a real personal element in
Oh,
this.
very,
for
very
Daniel.
strong. Daniel needs to find out the truth and dreads to find out the truth. Because he's not so naive as to think that his father or anybody else is perfect.
Well, not only that, but if you're the head of special branch, they have
Yes.
a different standard because they're trying to prevent various, it's the same conundrum we're facing today about, the balance between security and other considerations. And so Daniel is, Pitt,
Yeah.
Thomas Pitt is charged with keeping the realm safe, and there's a lot going on. They're anarchists, they're the Irish rebels, all the rest of it. So he can't maybe play by the same rule book as he did when he was a policeman.
You can't, and that was the centre of one story, a Pitt story, that the only if I'm not prepared to do this particular unpleasant thing, then I shouldn't be doing this job. Then you've got to have somebody who will occasionally make a decision that's dicey. But it's a bit late now. I can't walk away from it and have somebody else come in, because they've got to act tonight, and they've got to act on all the knowledge I have. So I've come to the Rubicon. In a way, I either cross it or I back away and let everybody down who's trusted me to do this.
Right. So Daniel's a little worried that his father might, in fact, have had to make some difficult decision, and maybe that is going to come and haunt him. So there's a lot going on in this book. It's really fun, but you haven't lost the people that you loved in the pits. They're still there. It's just slightly different. Although the daughter has emigrated to America.
Yes, but she comes back in the next one.
Oh, she comes back.
Yes,
okay.
she comes back with her husband and
okay.
a little girl.
Well, see, you have more knowledge than we do. We can only read the book.
I just finished writing it. Yes, she comes back with her little girl.
Excellent.
And her husband. I mean, it's a good marriage. It's not a problem. But Cassie thinks that Daniel is wonderful because she's 3. And he gets paid to argue. Imagine it. Anyone here, several of you have been little girls, and you've probably got little girls. Paid to argue?
Instead of quashed. Yes. So it's great. And, Charlotte is there. Daniel does not live at home anymore, but he is able to obviously go home in difficult times. So.
Oh yes, he's still close with his family, but he has his independence. And he meets a young woman. Well, she's not that young actually. She's nearly 40. She's the daughter of, in those times that wasn't young anymore.
Seems very young to us.
Oh,
Come on, kid. Would you like to be 40 again? I certainly would.
But I would like to have the things past that happened from 40 onwards. It's a mixed idea. I would like to look 40 and feel 40 and still be where I am. Not doing that. But her name is Miriam, and she is the daughter of Marcus Ford Croft, the head of Chambers. And she's a rebel because she studied chemistry and medicine at college, but of course she's a woman, so she's not allowed to graduate and all that sort of thing.
Well, she studied, but she wasn't allowed to get a degree.
Yes.
Right, which
Yes.
I don't think many of you realize is that women were actually able to attend Oxford and Cambridge or whatever, but they were not allowed to get degrees until it was after the war. Dorothy Sayers was a pioneer at that.
It was after the war.
It was after the war,
Yeah.
wasn't it?
Yeah.
1919 sticks in my mind as a
That
year.
could be, or it may even have been a little bit later, like 21. But yeah, it was definitely
right
after
in
the
there.
war. Yeah.
Yes, I had a headmistress when I was 12, 13, and we kept in contact until she died of old age at 90-something. But she was quite a remarkable woman, and she graduated, but was not allowed to be given her diploma, and it was given long afterwards.
When did women's suffrage pass in the UK? Does anybody remember? Was it 1920?
1919, I think.
Or 19, I think once that happened, it was difficult to deny women, a degree. I mean, once women got the vote, then some of these other barriers would have,
Some of them came down.
Some of them would have come down.
I can remember quite well when a married woman, if she overpaid the tax, but was deducted and then she didn't know it, it was repaid to her husband, not to her. What?
Well, there was lots of legislation between the wars that made a difference for women
This
regarding
was not that
property
long
and
ago.
custody of children and divorce and all kinds of interesting things. I mean, think about Princess Margaret not allowed to marry Peter Townsend because he was a divorced man, and then look what's happening today. With Harry
could have
and
married.
Meghan Markle, who, is like the last possible person that you would think
She could have married
that the royal
Townsend.
family would, I mean, she's biracial, she's Jewish, she's divorced, she's American, and she's an actress, whereas,
I didn't know she was
I mean,
Jewish.
oh yeah, knocked Edward off the throne and prevented Margaret from marrying Peter Townsend, although nobody knows how that
She
would have
was
worked out.
baptized. She was baptized.
Was she?
Yes.
Okay, but
She-
nonetheless,
It
just
shouldn't
think of the
Right.
enormous difference, that,
It shouldn't matter because Edward's, what his name is miles from the throne.
well,
Harry.
Margaret was behind Elizabeth's children by the time all
Yes,
that came up, so
exactly.
she was
She
not,
was never going to be queen. She should have
no,
said,
but
"I'm marrying
it had to
him."
do with Elizabeth being head of the church, not so much the succession, and so maybe that tie is less critical now, but as far as I know, she is still actually head of the Church of England in
Yes,
concept, and so one of her children, maybe the church now
Defender.
allows divorce.
defender of the faith.
Right. So maybe that's the difference, as the church has modified its stand. Well, there's all kinds of
He's
issues
going to have
that
to.
look up.
Charles is divorced.
Yes. Right. Well, that's another whole drama. We yes.
Oh, we
Will Camilla ever be queen? That's a whole thing. We could
Why do
just
you
go
think
on and on.
Shakespeare was
and
English? It's all that material.
Right. Here's a total digression, but you may or may not know that a publisher called Hogarth, which I think is a division of Random House, has commissioned modern rewrites of Shakespeare's plays by a whole lot of interesting authors. And Macbeth, which is coming out Tuesday, has been rewritten by, you will call him Joe Nesbo, but his actual name is J. Nesbø, who's a Norwegian, very dark, serial killer, Harry Hula, and all the rest of it. And he has rewritten Macbeth for modern times. And I read an interesting article saying that he thought that he would discard parts of the play because it wouldn't work, right? And then as he went through the play, he realized it was a totally modern drama and that everything in it was in fact...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I know. Which I thought was really,
Wake up, fella.
yeah, was really interesting. And other people have written other plays.
Yes, and a total distortion of history. Macbeth was actually a good guy, and Lady Macbeth was ahead of us now, in that she instituted residential accommodation for people whose families were in hospital, and they had to take food in. She provided food and shelter and so forth. Socialized medicine in 10 whatever it was, 11 something.
Well, Shakespeare was, he borrowed plays, but he also was
Oh yes, he had no
political.
regard.
I mean, Richard III doesn't actually bear a whole lot of relation to Richard III. If you read Josephine Tey's classic, The Daughter of Time, which is in its own way really flawed, but nonetheless, Shakespeare was an official sort of apologist for the Tudors. But history, the voices that we know in history are written for the winners. They are not written in general for the losers.
No, but because he had to support the Queen. If Richard III was a good king, then Henry VII had no right to the throne, and thus Elizabeth had no right either. I mean, he knew which side his bread was buttered on.
Yes.
Not
But
to
we
mention
can't
keeping
go
his
to
head
Shakespeare
on
for
his
actual
shoulders.
history, right? But
Keeping his head on his shoulders
Yes.
as opposed to in a nice basket somewhere.
Yes.
yes.
Yes. He
Yeah.
made jolly good plays, but it didn't matter. The only trouble is that we tend to think that is history instead of drama.
Well, there weren't too many people like Man for All Seasons who actually stood up for principle and lost his head in the
That was a
process.
good play, though, wasn't
It
it?
was an excellent play. Right. Well, here we are digressing again.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I don't know what more we could really say about young Daniel. He has one case, and then he gets a more challenging case, and his family's reputation reverberates around, and you have to wonder how it will come out. And I said to Anne, there's at dinner, there's kind of an instinct that we have when we read about a defense attorney or a barrister on the defense side to think that the client is always going to be innocent, right? And the whole job of this book and this particular lawyer is to prove, contrary to all evidence and testimony, that the client really is innocent. But how much more interesting in some respects to defend one where the client's guilty, and you either deal with the fallout or you have to figure out how you can do a credible defense when you know the guy did it. The only real exception that I know of to that obligation is if, I'm trying to remember, if somehow you gain knowledge of a crime to be committed while you are defending
Yeah.
somebody, then you are released from your obligation and you are supposed to report it. I think that's the deal.
But that's too easy a way out for a good tight story.
Well, yeah.
You've got to make your people heard.
Right. So I want young Daniel to have a case coming down the road where, it turns out that he's actually defending the guilty person and has to deal with it. I'm sure you're up for that.
Oh yes. Yes, yes, and have somebody found innocent that you know damn well is guilty, or you don't know, but he tells afterwards, "Did you know?" I don't know. You have to satisfy a certain proportion of readers, or your publisher won't take it.
So why are you so fascinated with legal drama? Because there are many things you could write, but somehow you always need to wind up in court.
It's like the ancient Egyptian obsession with weighing the soul, deciding what is right and what is wrong, and that it really I almost always find it very much more difficult than you think. And that the person who committed the crime may not necessarily be the most unpleasant person around. The things I hate, and the fact that you're here indicates that you possibly agree at least some of it, is self-righteous vindictiveness. Because so many of the people who have never actually committed a crime have committed an awful lot of sins. And you find that I have judges and bishops and people like that who come unstuck ungracefully.
You mean while we're living through this drama, you're writing about it in a different era?
Yeah.
Right. Yes.
Actually, what I'm writing about at the moment is a photographer in 1933, a woman, who has to try and prevent an assassination and fails, and then gets blamed for it.
This is your new.
Yes, my new venture. It's 1933, a thriller, and it only takes about 10 days, and she's a different person by the end of it.
I know you're really fascinated with it, but you said part of the reason is you like her family and the other people.
Oh yes, I've
connected with
developed her family. Her grandfather is my father,
her. Oh yeah.
and her father is a bit of a stuffed shirt, but he has his reasons as well. And she lost her brother, and I was first writing this about the time I lost my stepbrother, so it's even got his name. And I haven't got a sister, but her sister lost her husband. Both of them died together in the same regiment in the last week of the war. They carry a lot of baggage.
So when is this book? This is one you're still writing and turning in? Or
Yes, I've
what-
got to
what are
turn
you
it in
doing?
by this autumn, I think the next. It replaces the next monk.
So there's a monk for fall, and then
There's-
we're moving to 1934.
No, monk for fall, then you're moving, next spring will be another Daniel,
Okay.
and then Elena will come in the autumn.
Okay. It's all good to
I
know
hope.
that there are all these books coming, right? That's encouraging.
Well, I love the family. I've got plans for her, for a love affair, which will end happily, ultimately, and also for her sister. Well, I've got all sorts of things planned.
I can see why she'd never give up writing. You mean to be God in your own universe. It's a wonderful thing. Yeah.
Well, it's such fun. I mean, sometimes it doesn't go well, and you want to throw the whole lot out the window, but littering the street I'd only have to go down and find the pieces of paper again, so I stuff them somewhere, and go and have a good stamp and so forth, and then come back and try and do it again.
Yeah, you're still doing 2 books a year. That's a lot.
And a novella.
And a novella, right? Because we get the Christmas book.
Yes.
Right. Are you happy with that pace? Do you have time for any sort of life?
Oh, let me see. I went out on Good Friday and I did something, I can't remember what, with somebody, and I can't remember what. And I went out on Saturday for lunch and for dinner, and I went out for dinner on, I had visitors and then went out for dinner on Sunday, and I went out for lunch on Monday, and went out for dinner Monday evening,
You're an absolute social
Yes.
butterfly.
and then get back to work again now. But it was lovely, it was fun. I met some very interesting people.
In Los Angeles. You
Yes.
would meet interesting
Yes,
people
yes,
in
I was
Los
told.
Angeles.
Yes. And it's surprising how many of them turn out to be in the business. I
What,
said,
in Los Angeles? I'm not surprised that everybody in Los Angeles isn't somehow in the business.
I sat next to somebody very interesting at a Seder, which was held a little late because the rabbi happened to be up a mountain in Peru at the time, the right time. But he came back down again and was there for was it Monday, Sunday and Monday? Anyway, and the person on the other side of me was an Israeli girl, and she spoke Hebrew, so she helped all the celebrations, translated a little bit. And just before we went, she said, "What do you do?" I said, "Oh, right." "Oh, what?" And I told her a little bit, and she turned out to be a film producer and director.
Wow. How handy is that?
Very, and that sort of thing happens to me quite often.
Good. Well, that's one thing you've always wanted was, in fact, a series, not a
To be
movie, but
involved.
yeah,
I like working with somebody instead of always working alone. I'm a
right.
people person.
Yeah,
Some writers are reclusive and like to shut out the world and get into their own world. I like to interact with other people. My ideas come much thicker and faster and if somebody says, "Well, have you thought of this instead?" If they're suggesting it to me, I will seriously think of it, and often it's very good.
well, I think it would be very interesting for you if one of your series creations developed, a visual presentation.
I would like it very much. The trouble is that they will say we don't want period stuff.
It's because it's more expensive.
Yes, or I can see that.
Yeah. But on the other hand, Acorn TV is right there. So yes, maybe we'll all live to be grateful to the Agatha Christie Limited or whatever. Because if you think about it, if you watch those with the cars and the trains and it's incredibly expensive to produce
Oh
that.
yes. Well, I mean, the both Monks and Pitts are optioned, and Daniel is optioned by the Pitt people as well,
Yeah.
separately, but it is.
Well, we'll see. They've done very well with some of the costume things, like Victoria. So
Yes, they have.
yeah, it might be encouraging news.
Well, Downton Abbey wasn't exactly a nothing, was it?
No, I actually allowed Highclere Castle to be rebuilt, so got a new roof. Certainly. Right. So while Anne is working in her water, how about 8 questions that any of you might like to formulate? And why don't we start with you, and then we'll come over there.
Why did you pick the Victorian period?
Because the publisher said yes. The first, I'd written many periods, but it was the first mystery, and the first Victorian, and the first yes.
That was the Cater Street Hangman,
Yes.
right?
And so
I
naturally
remember when it published, and I picked it up and read it, and how much I liked it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And so naturally I wrote another one as much like it as possible. But it is a good period to pick for, it isn't only that. It's a good period to pick for a lot of reasons. I don't like stories set in little villages. We don't have any villages in England that have a murder every 6 months. People would move out and... It's a pleasant fantasy, but it really is a fantasy. I wanted to write something that could have been true. And so I picked London because it was the biggest city in the world at the time, and the centre of the empire. And if there was ever a place that could have anything happen, almost everybody passed through London, every kind of person. It was the biggest port in the world. Therefore, it was a good place to set. A homicide detective would have plenty of cases. And also, the 1880s were a period of great ebullience and belief that we could do almost everything. If it can be done, we can do it. If it can't, it'll take a little longer. But it gave me a setting that I could put anything in and get away with it. Terrific contrasts between rich and poor, and they were side by side. The front of a house could be glorious and the back side could move into desperate poverty. And it was a time of invention, glorious fashions. If you can't make romance out of gaslight and hansom cabs and gowns like that, you're not trying. And also, it was a time when we believed very much in our ability to do anything. We were a long way from the dark shadows of the 1914. It was the last sort of kick of the ancient, or not ancient, but of ancient history, old history. And I would say that the beginning of the First World War was the end of history and the beginning of the present world.
Yes.
And we were at the end of that century. We had the naughty 90s, we had so much in music and drama and gaiety and absurdity and wit. It was a lovely time in which to write, especially since from our vantage point we know it didn't last.
Did you have a question?
I did, and I'm embarrassed to say that I've never read one of your books. But I've had several people recommend them. That's why I was curious about this discussion tonight. It sounds like you write different series.
Yes.
If I were to start reading one of your series, where would I start, or what would you recommend?
Well, that depends upon, I mean, I don't know you, whether you want it to be a little lighter or a little darker. I also have a series set in World War One, which is 5 books. The Pitt ones, which start in 1881, I think, a little lighter than the Monks, which start earlier. Monk is a man who wakes up one day in what he thinks to begin with is a workhouse. Then he realizes it's daylight and all the people are still in bed. It's got to be hospital. And the male nurse comes to him and says, "The police want to see you. You better straighten yourself up a bit." He gives him a mirror. Who the hell is that? He doesn't have any memory at all. The police want to see him. He's injured. He's hurt down the side. And he doesn't know anything. And from there, he has to hide the fact, because when the police come, they obviously don't like him. And then it emerges from the conversation that he is one of them. But he can't remember anything. And when he comes out, there's no social services to catch him, as there would be now. He has to make his own way. He can remember his skills, but not his memory. He doesn't know who's a friend or who's an enemy or why somebody dislikes him. And he's given a very unpleasant case to solve, and the further he goes in solving it, the more his flashes of memory indicate that he could have been involved.
And what was the name of that?
That's called The Face of a Stranger.
And
if
then
you,
about-
if you start with the Pitts, you really should start with the Cater Street Hangman, because much of the point of that book, the impact of that book would be dissipated if you read a later one, because you would know how some things came out that are suspenseful. It's like if you've ever read Elizabeth Peters, if you didn't read Crocodile on the Sandbank first, it would never have the same impact on you if you read it later, because you would know that one of the main characters that was a suspect is no longer a suspect. So, it kind of ruins the book.
Almost all of them deal with some social issue or other, which is still a problem today. It'd be lovely to think that we didn't have those problems, but we do. We don't learn.
Isn't that true?
Yes, I'm afraid so.
And if you like Cater Street Hangman, you've got 20-some books to go. How many William Monks are there now?
I think the 23 monks and 33 pits.
Yeah. So, it's good. It's a good investment, because then you have lots of them to read instead of a few. Did you have a question, or are you just stretching? Just stretching. Okay.
And
Yes, sir.
16 Christmas novellas.
It's sort of a follow-up to the last one. It all seemed historically accurate. I have no idea how much you bent the truth. How much do you research? Because, for instance, it was a surprise to me that the police were such low class, considered.
They were in the beginning.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, how much did you research to find that stuff out?
Quite a lot. And, I've been doing it for a long time.
At least 25 years. We've already established that. That was actually 30, I think.
I think it's over 30 now.
Is it now?
Yes. Well, the Cater Street Hangman was published in 1979.
Oh, yeah. So even
Yeah.
longer than I thought. Coming up on 40 years now. Right.
I nearly said that, and I thought maybe I got it wrong. But yeah, I do 3 books a year now, but I only did for much less earlier on. And there are, I think it's about the 16th Christmas novella, which they're quite short, 40,000 words, 150 pages. But they all make a major character of one of the minor characters of either Pitt or Monk.
But you need to know that universe. Well, you don't need to know, but if you read the Monks or the Pitts, then you'd be more familiar with what's going on. Right.
But I think I'm accurate. I've made 1 or 2 mistakes, which I think are very minor. I had Charlotte sing a song, "Charlie is my darling." 2 months before it actually came out. Not the right year. But you know, somebody would tell you. I also had women attend funerals, which apparently they didn't, but I'm sure they did sometimes.
Well, in your books, they definitely did.
Yes.
But no, they didn't as a general rule.
Yeah.
They stayed home in their various mourning things. There's a wonderful exhibit. The Metropolitan Museum of Art has a costume institute, which I truly love and have haunted for years when I go to New York. And I stumbled into the Victorian mourning one, and there were actually dictated shades from coal black, you know, and you merge sort of towards gray, and then you could get into purple and lavender, and it was like a chrysalis sort of, you know, moving your way through these various stages for 2 years, I think, was the norm.
For women.
For women, right.
I don't think a man had to stay home and, you know.
No, and then there were appropriate veils and, you know, sort of like a burqa, you know,
Yeah.
you know, whatever it all was. But there was a real ritual connected with, you know, Victorian mourning and rules for women that were quite strict.
When we realised quite how few rights, if any, a woman had at that period, we realised how far we've come now. It's 1860 something or other, the Married Women's Property Act. Up until that time, everything that belonged to you, but if you were married, belonged to your husband actually, including your children. Your personal underwear, anything, nothing. You could not be robbed because you did not own anything. And it's extraordinary to feel that we once thought that way.
It wasn't even that long ago.
No, it wasn't.
The American one was 1848, in
Yeah.
case you're wondering, in Seneca Falls, but the British one was later.
There
On the
was-
other hand, the British abolished slavery before we did, so the pendulum sort of swings back and forth.
I was reading something, a nonfiction book about something else, but it was talking about the Married Women's Property Act.
Yeah.
And it went on to explain that essentially they considered when in the marriage service, when he said, and you become one, that the civil person of the woman ceased to exist.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yes.
It was
That
literal.
she didn't have any, she no longer had a civil identity, so of course you couldn't have property because the one identity was the man's. To become one,
And yet when you
literally.
married, there were settlements and things that
Yeah.
could be made
Yeah.
on women so that, you know, in the event of death or whatever.
Oh, in the event
They
of death,
would-
yes, but this is.
But while you were actually married was the
Yes,
problem.
and we
No
still
wonder
have
there
a-
weren't more, there probably were more homicides than we
A
knew.
lot more than we knew, yes. It's interesting that Miss So-and-so instead of Mrs. is a hangover from that, I think. In Europe, you're Madame when you're of age. You don't say Mademoiselle.
But Mrs. was also a courtesy title, like all the housekeepers, like in Downton Abbey
Yes.
and everything, you know, and the cook. The cook was always a Mrs., and the housekeeper was always a Mrs., regardless of
Yes.
whether they were actually
But you
married.
could live and die of old age as Miss if you were not married, because it puts you. Can you imagine any man accepting being called master, or his, you know, master so-and-so like a little boy?
You know, you would have been a real feminist back then, and difficult to deal with.
And you think I'm not now?
No, I'm talking about then.
Yes,
I
I
mean,
would-
today you fit right in, but then you
Yes.
would have been a real problem.
Well, you know, when I first went to work, I worked in a shop and I did exactly the same job as the man beside me, but he was paid more because he was a man. And I didn't think to ask where I could buy my petrol and so forth cheaper because I was a woman. You just expected the man would go on and own a house and so forth, and you would live in one room all your life if you didn't marry.
Well, but there were other things that happened. For example, if women had jobs, if they married, they automatically left. Or if you had children and so forth. So there were women who chose not to marry because they were interested in their career. Did any of you watch Bletchley Park? Do you remember how hard it was for those women who had, you know, especially the one that was the most active, and you know, to go back to civilian life, and you couldn't tell anybody what you'd done, and you couldn't do anything, and there you'd been, you know, in Bletchley responsible for all this, and that was, you know, that was 1945. It wasn't
Yes, it
wasn't that long ago.
We've come a long way in the last 10 years or so.
Yes.
But there's a bit of a way to go yet in mindset.
Well, there's a lot going on at the moment in various ways, not only just politics, but I mean in terms of, equal pay for women and all sorts of stuff is happening. Yes, sir.
Just a point, we were talking about Bletchley Park. The U.S. Army Intelligence School is at Fort Huachuca, and I knew the former commander of that school. And I met some people who have graduated who are from there. And, women can now join the military, but they can't serve in combat arms, and so they join transportation or intelligence. And so they have raised the bar. It's now tougher to get into the intelligence school because the women have raised the bar for entrance.
Oh, is that interesting? They have raised the bar, or the bar has been raised to try
No,
and keep
they
some
have
of that?
raised the bar because they are so
Smarter.
smarter that
Yes.
to get into
Working
being
is
an
the case
intelligence
there.
officer is now
Right.
women now get those slots competitively, and men are having a difficult time.
Women didn't used to get to be Rhodes Scholars. I'm not sure if
Yeah.
they can even be today. I haven't really checked.
Yes.
But isn't
Well,
that interesting?
It's very interesting, and thank you very much indeed
Yeah.
for sharing it.
Yeah.
You're obviously a secure man.
I'm waiting for women to take over this world because that's how it's going to get better, maybe.
But women have led other countries.
Yes.
So far, not ours, but
That's happened a long time ago. I remember
Yeah.
listening to Rachel Maddow, who's
Yeah.
a feminist of big life.
Yes.
I think there were 19 other countries have had female leaders, and it's surprising which countries they are. I would never have thought India, that used to have Sati and so
Yeah,
forth.
yeah.
But Indira Gandhi, nobody said no to her twice.
well, while we were in New Zealand in January, news came that the unmarried female prime minister in her 40s is pregnant and having her first child.
Yeah.
And they were all being very supportive. But I thought, how would that play here?
Oh, dear.
I know. I thought it was.
That's a little too.
I'm just saying.
Yeah,
It's
how
okay.
interesting. I didn't hear that.
Yeah. Yeah, she was all over the broadsheets there and so forth. Yes, sir, you had your hand up before. Sorry.
Have you had a consistent editor that you've worked with through various series, or do you change editors depending on the genre and timing?
No, I have got one editor, and I've had one publisher. I've gone through 2 or 3 editors because I've been there for a long time, since 1979. But I've had 3 editors at Random House.
That's all.
No. You can't necessarily control your editor because they cycle in and out of publishing and they have lives and children and they die and
The first one
Change
died,
jobs.
the second one moved away, and I'm on to the third one, and I hope I keep her for a long, long time. And I've had one agency all the time.
that's great.
Interesting.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Sorry, that was my phone and I actually know who it is and it's not anybody related to me. So there we go. Anybody have a final question that they would like to ask?
I want to know who got Vespasia's costumes, her dresses. Didn't Charlotte always borrow Vespasia's dresses?
Good
Oh,
point.
yeah.
Yes,
That's
it's
a
a
good-
good point. I hadn't thought of it myself,
Well, now you have time to put it in.
but fashion changes.
Yeah, but the
Well,
materials would still be fabulous.
Yes, they would.
And there'd be less of them in the more contemporary dresses, so it's conceivable.
Yes, they could be made up to date. It's a very
Yes.
good idea. I shall have to do it in the next
Well, on that cheerful note, I want to thank you all for coming this evening, which is lovely to have you. And I have a little book to give away, which has nothing to do with Victorian or whatever. But Anne is always very interested in, as you can tell, women's roles and various obstacles and so forth. And this young woman, her boyfriend was in a car accident and had a severe frontal lobe injury. And so part of the dynamic of this series is dealing with him as he has changed and learned to cope with. He has a lot of strategies for how he lives his life and manages given this injury. And he's really a dish and he's great. And one of the things that really defines him is his car, which I'm sad to tell you is a casualty in the book. So part of it, I really love that. Anyway, he's a former SWAT officer with the Atlantic Police Department, and she is a young woman who's they're transitioning, I think, towards becoming professional private investigators, but she's been an amateur up till now. So the book is called Necessary Ends. What do we got, Patrick? Like 10?
We are at 10.
Okay, so would you pick a number between 1 and 10, and we'll give this book away to that person?
2.
2. It's you. Okay, wonderful. So the book's called Necessary Ends by Tina Will. It's actually out in the store as we speak, but that's an advanced reading copy. So I hope you enjoy it. All right. Anyway, thank you all very much for coming. I'm going to ask Anne to wander over to the little table over there and